So I will open up MeshMixer and I'll show you what this program looks like. You can import your object just by clicking import, and you can see this is the scan that I just exported. You got the 3 files here. Just click on the OBJ file and it'll load the other 2 files along with it. MeshMixer can be a bit slow sometimes. There we go. So in MeshMixer, the controls are slightly different. The right mouse button is the one that allows you to reorient your view. You still have the scroll wheel here to zoom in and out. Off the bat, I can see that my model is not correctly oriented. So I want that surface of the blanket to be horizontal when I look at it from these cardinal angles here. So in order to fix that, just go to Edit, Transform, and that gives you this manipulator tool. If I manipulate the orientation, I can see this tool rotated along with the object. That's because I'm using what's called local space to reorient myself. The space that I'm working in is the global space or the world space. So if I want to use the world space as my sort of reference point, you can just change this to world frame, and you can see how the manipulator tool is now oriented along the X, Y, and Z axes of my 3D scene that my camera's in. So this manipulator tool will allow you to move things up and down, and you can see the Y changing as I move stuff. It'll allow you to rotate an object around a pivot. And it'll allow you to scale an object up and down. And you can also use these inputs to scale things independently. So now it's all warped out. Looks kind of cool. Keep this at 111, which is the default scale. So I'm back in the original scale. And basically when you reorient an object, just make sure you're looking at it from the basic direction. So I can see if I look at it from the front, see it's a little off there. Look at it from the side. Let's try to fix all these angles. Make it look a little straighter from all directions. And then I can look at it from the top, and I can see that I need to rotate it about there. And look at it from the bottom again, the sides. That's pretty good. I'll accept that. And now I've got this thing a bit more oriented as if it was in real life. MeshMixer can do a lot more than just reorient. You can look at the documentation online to see all the features of the software. There's good documentation, and it goes step by step. But a tool that I want to point out is the brush tool inside of the Sculpt tool set here. And this basically will let you alter the shape of your object as if it was made out of clay. So the draw will kind of extrude a surface. You can change the size of your brush using this slider here. You can play around with those settings. Usually you want to use a small brush because MeshMixer can run really slowly sometimes. It's a lot of processing that has to go on behind the scenes. And be aware that it crashes from time to time, so make sure you save your work regularly. If I zoom in here, say I want to modify the geometry of these leaves, I can just click, hold, and drag and pull out these tendrils. And it tries to keep the texture, the image surface, along the same lines as it was before, but it'll change the color, so be aware of that as well. So say I wanted to keep that, I'm going to undo all those changes. Go back to the original. Okay. Oops, too far. Okay. Okay. Another thing we can do is we can see down here we've got about 150,000 triangles in our scene. You can probably get away with using less triangles, and you can filter the mesh. If you want to see the mesh itself, let's see, you need to open the Show Wireframe option here under View. You can also look at your objects in the object browser. This can be handy if you have multiple objects. That shows the geometry. So it's pretty finely detailed geometry. You could probably use less geometry if you wanted. And to do that, you can go to Edit. Oh, sorry, Select. This allows you to select pieces and modify them separately. If you double click, it'll select everything. And at that point, you can go to Reduce. And this will reduce the number of triangles in your geometry. So it's a bit easier for the computer to handle something with less triangles. A really good amount of triangles is probably somewhere between 30 and 80,000, but Unity will be able to handle 150,000, which is fine. But if you have like 1 million, 2 million triangles, you definitely want to reduce that down to something in the mid-100s. So you can do this by changing the percentage of the triangles. So 50% here of 150 triangles will be 75,000 triangles. It's a bit easier to think in terms of numbers of triangles instead of percentages. So if you change that option to triangle budget, that's the maximum number of triangles you're going to get out of this process. And it defaults to 1,000, which is way too low. Let's try 75,000. And press Enter to redo the process. Looks about the same, but we have half the number of triangles in our scene now. So I'm going to say that's acceptable. And clear selection will let you see the texture. So it's about the same look, but we've cut our geometry in half, so it's a lot easier for the computer to render and manipulate something like that. From here, I'm going to export this again. So I'm going to actually make a new folder next to the old one called rootball obj2 remesh, because I redid the mesh of the object. And I'll call this also rootball obj2 remesh. take a look, see the results. Got the 3 files again here. If I open this up in MeshLab, shows me the object, and it looks pretty much the same as it did before I reduced the number of triangles, so it looks good. I may also quit out of MeshMixer so it doesn't eat up all my RAM. Don't save. And now I'm going to show how to bring this into Unity and manipulate it a bit further. Oh, actually, I want to show first. So this is the result of the MeshMixer export. And I want to look briefly at the texture itself, because this is a really good way to change the surface directly of your object without having to do anything in a 3D modeling software. You can change the look and feel of your object just by using Photoshop. So if I zoom in here, you can see this is pretty finely detailed. That's 100%. So I've got a good texture. But say I want to change the color of this book. So you can use the lasso tool or some sort of selection tool. I'm not going to go over Photoshop's basics, but you can find that information online if you're not familiar. Let's get rid of this little guy. Good enough. So I'm going to change the color of this book, and we'll see how that looks on the actual object. Oops, I missed a spot. Make it hot pink. Okay. Got a little piece of the indigo blanket here, but that's okay. We'll just see how that looks. So when you save this, you can save this in whatever format the original was. So it's probably easiest to save as and make it something slightly different. We'll call this altered. You're going to end up with lots of files, so you have to figure out some sort of naming system that makes sense to you. And click Save. Probably don't need it to be that high quality. And that's it. And if I open this up in MeshMixer, we'll see it's using the original texture. It's because I haven't relinked it with the new texture. So the easiest way to do this is just to rename the files. So you can call this original. Just rename that to original, and then get rid of the altered on this so it's the original file name. And then open it again in MeshLab. And you can see we now have a pink book. It's missing a part, and I would suspect that's because, let's open this back up. That's because this part of the book the texture is not located in this part of the texture image. It's actually down here. I can see this white part. That's just how the software figured out where to put that. So if I want to fix that, you can just select that part and try and imitate the same style. Hopefully I can get it close to right. And something like that. Save it. And I think I can just reload the file in MeshMixer, in MeshLab. And now I've got more of the book. There's still a little piece missing over there, but that's kind of the process of manipulating a texture. Just edit it in Photoshop and it'll show up on your model as long as you use the same file name as the original texture. Okay, so I've got a pink book. Now I'll bring this into Unity and we can see how we can manipulate it further in there. I'm going to create a new Unity project. And just go to New. Make sure you're on 3D. I'll put this in a new folder here. I'll just call this root ball tutorial. That's my Unity project. Everything's going to live inside that folder. And if you share this project with someone else, they want to edit your code or edit your scene, make sure you share the whole folder. You want to zip that up into a zip file and then send that. So I'll call this root ball tutorial. That's my project file name. And I'll add the standard assets package just so I can use the first-person controller really easily. Okay, so I've opened Unity, and now I'm going to bring in my 3D object. So I'll create a new folder here. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I'll just take this folder. This is the edited object, and drag the whole thing right into my assets folder. Just want to make sure that you bring all the files in, not just the OBJ file, but drag all the files that you want to use in Unity. So your texture, your material, and your OBJ geometry file. So it's right here. If I want to use it, Unity has taken the OBJ file and created a Unity model. So we've got this is our mesh here. For some reason it creates two different meshes. I'm not 100% sure why. But it also creates a material object here which uses our texture. You can see it mapped, the texture mapped to a sphere. But if we want to see the object itself, you can see it like that. But those three things are all contained within this. And this is your actual mesh. So to bring that into Unity, just drag it either into your scene or into your hierarchy. I'm in the game tab. That's why I wasn't showing it. So there it is. And you can see the orientation has changed from where we had it in MeshMixer. It's still straight. It's still straight in our world, but the MeshMixer uses a different X and Y, Z and Y axes than Unity. But that's no problem. We can fix that just by rotating our model. And, oops, negative 90 is perfect rotation. That's all we need to do there. So just view it from a few different angles, and in Unity we can do a ton of manipulation of aspects of this mesh. We can edit the object itself by stretching it. But that's going to edit the entire mesh, not just the bits and pieces like we can do in MeshMixer. You can rotate it, as we saw, but the real thing, the real power of Unity is the rendering engine, which uses the materials to create glossiness and reflections, and interact with lights, create shadow. And that's a really powerful tool, and one of the great features of Unity is just the ease of use of creating this rendering system. So you can see as I rotate this mesh, it's changing the lighting, changing the shadow orientation, the highlights. That's because this sun here is oriented in a specific direction. We can see, if we look at this from the top, zoom out, you can see the sun's kind of pointing away from the mesh. This is what's called a directional light. So it kind of mimics sunlight. The sun is so far away that it illuminates everything on the surface of the Earth pretty evenly, but from a specific angle. So we can do kind of the same thing using this light. It doesn't matter where in the scene your directional light is. Every scene starts with a directional light, by the way. You don't have to use directional lighting, but it's helpful just to understand what it is. So you can see as I change the orientation of the sun, this changes the placement of the shadows. If I want to simulate sunset, I want the sun horizontal orientation to be about flat. So I just change that, and you can see how it's changing basically my whole scene into a night scene. And if I flip it up, everything will be oriented from below. The sun will be lit, will be lighting things from below. So it's basically black. There's a little bit of light falling onto this side of the book. So that's kind of a sunrise effect. Now it's noon. Shadows are straight up and down. It's a really easy way to change the look and feel of your object. And there's a lot more you can do with lighting beyond just changing the orientation of your light. And to get into that, we need to look at the object itself and change its material properties. So here's our object. It's highlighted. Inside of the object is actually the thing you're going to be editing, which is this group 0. That's our actual mesh. And it contains our mesh renderer, which is what allows us to see the model in the scene, and another component, which is our material here. You can see these material properties. Now, for some reason, this material is locked. Not sure why MeshLab is opening. because I double-clicked it. But by default, these are locked when you import an object. But you can easily change that because this is just a default material. It basically has no properties yet. So you can create a new material with your own properties. Say you want to turn this surface into something like glass. So just go right-click on your assets and go to Create Material. And that gives you a new material. You can tell the materials because they look like spheres. And you could call this root ball glass. Typically you want to end with the three letters MAT for materials, just so you can identify it. And you can see it's just a white material. Basically, it has no texture attached to it, so there's no image, and there's kind of just a default glossiness. You can apply the material just by clicking and dragging onto an object in your scene. And now we've got a white model. But that's pretty boring, so let's make it glass. I can change the albedo, and the albedo is basically just a fancy word for the color of the object, kind of the basic color. So right now it's white. I can change it to red, change it to blue, but kind of a light blue-green might be where we want our color to be if this is going to be transparent glass or translucent glass. And also in the albedo, there's a transparency component. This is the A. So there's red, green, blue components to the color, as well as the A for alpha component, and that's our transparency. So we can just adjust that by changing this slider. So say we want it to be like pretty transparent. So push it to like 43, so that's okay. So you can see that even though I changed the color of this object, it didn't change the transparency. And that's because the rendering mode here defaults to opaque, which means there's no transparency. It just ignores the change we made to this alpha component. To make it transparent, just switch this to transparent. Now we've got a transparent object in our scene. You can also play with these material properties, the metallic material property and the smoothness. And metallic does kind of what it sounds like. It makes something look like metal. If we use our original texture, our original material, which we can do just by dragging it back onto the object, you can see the difference in how these things render. You can also play with the smoothness, which kind of simulates like roughness. Now it's looking a bit more like a water scene. This is more like a flat, matte, like frosted glass kind of look. Keep it looking like a bit like that. It's kind of like a plastic wrap. Decrease alpha, and these two sliders are basically what you want to play with here in the material to have different kind of effects. And we can add something below our scene. Why don't we add another one of these? This is an interesting glitch here. We can see that if we look at this object the object we just added, which is the vertical outlined one here. You can turn this off so we don't have to look at it. You can see we can't see it from this side. If I then change the angle that I'm viewing, I can see it. And that's because there are two sides to every triangle, a front and a back. If I look at the wireframe, you can see here, unselect so you can see that a bit clearer. This is the front of the object. This is where we scan from. You're also going to end up with back triangles. And those, unless you turn back-facing triangles on in Unity, those won't render and they'll be invisible. So just keep that in mind. Back to shaded. Go to the other side. And I'm going to, again, just rotate this so it's horizontal. Oops. Rotate it to horizontal. Turn this one back on. You can see. This up. What I want to show is the transparency effect, which really becomes clear when you have something in your scene you can see through. And the nice thing about these metallic sliders, here's the material, the metallic slider here, that also will change drastically the look when you reorient the object, new lighting. So now it's kind of facing the light, you can see, and it's quite bright. If I change the light so it's at an angle, basically just highlights the object as if it was kind of lit from the side instead of from the top. Kind of like more of a sunset type feeling on a very shiny object. If I keep going, see it's just highlighting the edges of those bridges. And now the light's coming through from behind. So you can play with the lighting, the direction of the light. You can see now I have my light selected. I can also play with the color of the light. So I can make this like a hot pink. Match the book surface here. You can see the color of the light changes the color of the object, so it kind of gives it a tint. If I just want white, normal lighting. By default, the light's a little yellow, I think, to simulate sunlight. So something like that to begin with. You can also change the type of light you have. So this directional light, as I mentioned, is like the sun. You can change this to spotlight, and this will give you kind of a cone of light. You can pull this out by dragging. You see it's kind of faint right now. Change the intensity of the spotlight, and it'll give you a more flashlight look. And this is a good way to create different colors or different types of lighting on different parts of your image. Say I want 2 lights. Duplicate that one, change it. This part is green. Have a stoplight Christmas type atmosphere here. Okay. So say I then want to adjust this texture. This is locked, but I can simply create a new texture, a new material. Call this root ball texture. And to basically reproduce this, all I need to do is take my image texture. I can use either the edited one or the original. I'll use the original. Just first you want to select that, take the texture, and drag it onto this box next to albedo. And now you can see my sphere has the texture on it. And if I want to apply that to the model, just take it and drag it onto the model. Now you can change the metallic aspect, smoothness. I'll add a new light. Just a directional light to make it a bit more visible. See what's going on here. Just move it out of the way. You can see it, the model is beginning to look more metallic. It's got this sheen to it now. You can play around with these controls just to see how they change the look and feel. Change the tint directly over the whole object, or you can change the tint by changing the color of the lights. So that's a basic introduction to altering material properties from a 3D scanned object in Unity. There's a few more things you can do here. Say I want to make this interactive. If I take my mesh here, which is inside the OBJ, I can add a component to make it a physical object that can interact with the surroundings. So if I go to Add Component, Physics, I can then find what's called the collider, which is what allows the object to have physical interactions. So typically these colliders, you want to use a box collider for like cubes. Capsule is usually used for characters. Or you can use a mesh collider, which will map the geometry of this object and turn it into a physical surface. So I've got the mesh collider. If I turn off the renderer, I can see I've got this green mesh now. And that's the surface of my object. So if I add a character from the standard assets, take the first person. Oops. Oh, sorry, I don't the whole folder. I just need the prefab. You can use the FPS controller right here. Drag it into your scene. You see, there's my first-person character. You want to make sure when you add a first-person character or a third-person character, you want to delete the main camera because you don't need it anymore in your scene. So there's a camera actually inside of this model. So my first-person character will allow me to interact with the environment, and now I can see what this model looks like from a tiny ant perspective. Note that I did not add a collider to this model here. So this model will allow me to pass right through. If I turn off the collider on my, go back to the scene view, I'm still running the game, by the way. You can run the game and then check out your scene view at the same time. You can see here, I've got this model highlighted, and I turn off the mesh collider. Let me go back to my game view, turn off the mesh collider, and I'll fall straight through. See, there I go. So the mesh collider is what allows me to interact with my object and experience it as if it was a physical object in space. Hope that's helpful, and we'll cover more on the photogrammetry aspect in another tutorial.